My name is Calista Meliora. I am 28 years old. 30 minutes ago, I stood on the sun-baked driveway of a Bel Air estate and watched my mother hand me a thick envelope of cash to leave my sister's wedding. She did not ask me to step aside. She did not ask me to stand in the back. She looked me up and down, taking in the oversized navy dress she forced me to wear, and told me my face would ruin the aesthetic. Before I explain what happened next, welcome to Sophia Told Stories. Drop your age and your city in the comments below, especially if you have ever been the invisible scapegoat in your own family. Stick around because the way this day ends will change how you look at the people closest to you. Let me paint the picture. Serena is my younger sister. Today was supposed to be the pinnacle of her existence, a $1 million spectacle designed to secure her place among the California elite. The iron gates of the venue were open just enough to show the sprawling lawns and the floral arches. I arrived right on time, holding the gift I spent weeks selecting, but I never made it past the security podium. Victoria, my mother, stepped out from the manicured hedges. Serena stood right behind her, wearing a custom silk gown, her face a contoured mask of manufactured perfection. They formed a physical barricade between me and the entrance. I waited for a greeting. Instead, Victoria unclasped her designer clutch. She pulled out a manila envelope and pressed it against my chest. Her voice was flat and calculated. "You do not fit the aesthetic, Calista." She spoke the words as if she were returning a defective pair of shoes. "You are too plain. The photographers from Vogue are inside and we cannot have you in the background of the gallery. Take this to cover your inconvenience and go quietly." I looked at the envelope. I looked at Serena. My sister adjusted her diamond earrings and refused to meet my eyes. She just nodded, agreeing that my mere presence was a threat to her social currency. In Los Angeles, where your image dictates your worth, being declared not camera-ready by your own blood is a unique kind of execution. They expected me to cry. They expected a scene. They braced themselves for the typical scapegoat reaction of begging for basic human decency. I gave them nothing. I did not scream. I did not throw the money back in their faces. I simply stood there, absorbing the profound arrogance of two women prioritizing an Instagram grid over their own family. I looked down at the drab, conservative dress Victoria had practically ordered me to wear, a garment specifically chosen to hide my figure and wash out my skin tone. They spent years grooming me to be the invisible backdrop to Serena's shining moments. Now even the backdrop was deemed too ugly for the main stage. Victoria gave me one last dismissive glance, turned on her heel, and escorted the glowing bride back toward the flashing cameras. The heavy iron gates pulled shut, locking me out on the hot pavement. I walked over to a stone bench near the valet stand, sitting down in the California heat. I held their bribe money in my lap. I was not plotting revenge. I was just analyzing the sheer desperation of their cruelty. I assumed that was the end of the humiliation. I was wrong. The real story was just about to walk through a side door. The California sun beat down on the warm stone bench. I sat alone, listening to the muffled strains of a classical string quartet drifting over the 10-foot-high privacy hedges. The manila envelope Victoria shoved into my chest rested on my lap. I traced the sharp edge of the thick paper. Inside was enough cash to cover a month of rent for a standard Los Angeles apartment. To my mother, that was the exact price of my absence. Growing up, Serena was the sun. Victoria orbited her, ensuring every ray of light hit her perfectly. I was the shadow. I was told my features were harsh, my frame too awkward for the camera. I accepted the oversized sweaters and the thick framed glasses, because when the woman who gave birth to you tells you how the world sees you, you believe her. I assumed I was protecting myself from judgment by fading into the background. I thought I was simply the genetic runner-up in a city that only rewarded first place. The heavy iron side gate clicked unlatched. A figure slipped through, pulling the door shut quickly behind him. It was Julian. If you know anything about the Los Angeles beauty industry, you know Julian. He charges thousands of dollars a day to paint the faces of list actresses and socialites. He wore a crisp black linen shirt and carried his iconic silver medal kit. He looked frantic. His eyes darted up and down the street before landing on me, sitting in the shade of an old oak tree. Julian jogged over. He dropped his heavy kit on the pavement and crouched right in front of me. The scent of expensive setting spray and floral hairspray clung to him. He reached out and gently tilted my chin up. A single tear I had not even realized fell was wiped away by his thumb. "Calista," he breathed, his voice tight. "You need to understand what is actually happening in there." I shook my head, expecting pity. "Julian, you should go back inside. Victoria will ruin your career if she finds you talking to the outcast." He let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Victoria is currently hyperventilating in the bridal suite because the lighting is catching Serena's jawline at a bad angle. And do you know why the angle is bad? Because it is new." I stared at him. "What do you mean, new?" Julian glanced back at the gate to ensure no one was listening. "They did not banish you because you are plain. They banished you because they are terrified." He pulled a sleek tablet from his bag, typing in a passcode and turning the bright screen toward me. It was a series of medical invoices and highly detailed pre-operation digital renders. The numbers at the bottom of the screen totaled over $100,000. "Serena went to a discreet clinic in Beverly Hills 6 months ago," Julian whispered, his finger tracing the digital lines on the screen. "She had her jaw shaved. She had her cheekbones augmented. She had a subtle rhinoplasty. She paid a fortune to a top-tier surgeon to reconstruct her entire bone structure." I looked at the renders. The simulated face on the screen was hauntingly familiar. It was not Serena. It was me. "They are identical to your proportions," Julian continued. "Your exact jawline, your exact cheekbones. The irony is almost painful. Your name, Calista Meliora, literally translates from Greek and Latin to mean most beautiful and better. Victoria knew that. She always knew that." The realization hit me like cold water. The memories of my teenage years fractured and rearranged themselves into a new, sinister picture. I remembered the optometrist appointment where Victoria insisted I needed thick, heavy frames, even though my vision was barely impaired. I remembered the way she threw away any form-fitting dresses I bought, claiming they made me look cheap and desperate. I remembered the strict rule that I was never allowed to wear my hair pulled back from my face. They were not hiding my flaws. They were hiding my perfection. Nature had gifted me the exact, effortless, classic California beauty that people pay millions to replicate. Victoria spent 2 decades gaslighting me into believing I was the ugly duckling, just so Serena could shine. And now, Serena had paid top dollar to literally carve my face into her own. If I stood next to the bride today wearing proper styling and without those ridiculous glasses, the Vogue photographers would not see a beautiful bride and her plain sister. They would see a stunning original and a synthetic plastic imitation. "You are the blueprint, Calista," Julian said, packing his tablet away. "If you walk into that reception, you expose the entire illusion. That is why Victoria handed you cash to disappear." I looked down at the envelope in my lap again. The sting of rejection evaporated, replaced by a sharp, analytical clarity. My family was not just vain. They were pathological. But Julian was not finished. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur. "The fake face is just the beginning. You need to know why today is so critical. Why Victoria is acting like a trapped animal." "Because of the Vogue spread?" I asked. "No," Julian replied. "Because of the bank." He explained that while doing Serena's makeup for the rehearsal dinner the night before, he overheard a screaming match between Victoria and a loan officer on speakerphone. Hollywood stylists hear everything. They are the invisible confessors of the elite, and people often forget they are in the room. The Bel Air estate I was currently locked out of was weeks away from foreclosure. The luxury cars parked in the driveway were leased and multiple payments behind. The designer clothes were bought on high-interest credit cards that were maxed out to the limit. My family was bankrupt. They are swimming in debt, Julian said, his eyes wide. They have been floating this fake wealth lifestyle for 3 years. This wedding is not a celebration. It is a financial transaction. I processed the information. The groom was Harrison Vanguard. The Vanguard family represented true generational wealth. They owned international shipping lines and commercial real estate empires. They did not care about Instagram followers or influencer status. They cared about legacy discretion and rock-solid assets. Victoria is relying on Serena marrying Harrison to save them, Julian explained. Once the ink on the marriage certificate is dry, Serena plans to leverage the Vanguard name to secure a lucrative lifestyle brand deal. She needs the Vanguard money to pay off Victoria's secret debts before the bank seizes the house. The pieces of the puzzle locked into place with a satisfying click. The cruelty I experienced today was not born of simple vanity. It was a desperate bid for survival. Victoria and Serena were drowning in a sea of financial fraud and synthetic beauty. They were playing a high-stakes game of deception against one of the most powerful families in the state. If the Vanguards find out the truth before the vows are exchanged, they will run, Julian said, standing up. They detest fake wealth. If they realize Serena is broke and her face is bought, the wedding is over. The family loses everything. Julian gave my shoulder a brief squeeze. You are not the outcast, Calista. You are the only real thing about that family. Go home. Do not let them make you feel small ever again. He grabbed his kit and hurried back through the iron gate, leaving me alone on the stone bench. The afternoon sun felt different now. The heat did not feel oppressive. It felt energizing. I stood up and smoothed the fabric of the awful navy dress. I looked at the Bel Air estate towering behind the hedges. For 28 years, I believed I was the weak link. I believed I was the burden they had to carry. They thought they had exiled a naive plain girl who worked a boring administrative job. They thought I would go back to my quiet life and cry over their rejection. They assumed my silence today was submission. They had no idea who was actually sitting on this bench. I walked toward the valet stand to retrieve my car. I did not need the cash in the envelope. I did not need their approval. Because while Victoria and Serena spent the last 5 years drowning in debt to maintain the illusion of success, I spent the last 5 years quietly building an empire in the shadows. As the valet brought my modest sedan around, I tossed the envelope of cash onto the passenger seat. I needed to get back to my penthouse in West Hollywood. Serena thought her marriage to the Vanguard heir was her golden ticket. She had no idea that the very people she was trying to impress were already doing business with me. The drive from Bel Air to West Hollywood took 40 minutes. I navigated the winding canyon roads, letting the cool Pacific breeze filter through the cracked windows of my sedan. Victoria thought I drove this sensible hybrid because I lacked ambition. She frequently told her country club friends that I worked in the back office of an accounting firm, processing spreadsheets and fetching coffee for middle management. I let her spin that narrative. It kept her eyes off my actual bank accounts. I pulled into the subterranean garage of a sleek, unassuming glass tower. To the casual observer, it looked like a high-end corporate residence. To the concierge, who nodded as I walked through the private entrance, it was the fortress of a ghost. I stepped into the dedicated elevator, pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, and waited for the doors to open directly into my penthouse. The space spanned the entire top floor, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the Los Angeles skyline. I walked straight to the master suite, unzipping that horrific, oversized navy dress. The fabric pooled on the hardwood floor. I took off the thick, heavy prescription frames Victoria insisted I wear, snapping them in half and tossing them into the trash bin. Next came the drab foundation meant to wash out my skin tone. I wiped it away with a hot towel, staring into the vanity mirror. Julian was right. The bone structure looking back at me was the exact canvas Serena had paid a surgeon to carve into her own face. The high cheekbones, the sharp jawline, the natural symmetry. I brushed out my hair, letting it fall freely over my shoulders. For the first time today, I actually recognized myself. I poured a glass of sparkling water and walked into my home office. This room was the nerve center of an operation my family could not comprehend if they tried. Wall-mounted monitors displayed global market trends, social media sentiment algorithms, and real-time crisis alerts. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Meliora Public Relations. In a city built on smoke and mirrors, Meliora is the invisible hand directing the wind. We do not represent reality television stars or desperate internet personalities. Our client roster is restricted to the 1% of the 1%. When a tech billionaire faces an insider trading scandal and needs his public image sanitized before a public offering, his team contacts Meliora. When a legacy luxury brand wants to reinvent its aesthetic for a younger demographic without alienating its base, we design the strategy. I built a 9-figure empire by understanding that true power in California does not seek the spotlight. True power holds the spotlight and decides who gets to stand in it. No one in the industry knows my name. The media speculates about the mysterious mastermind behind the firm, but I engineered my anonymity with paranoid precision. My legal director, David, serves as the public face of the company. David is a brilliant, ruthless, former corporate litigator who handles all face-to-face negotiations. He executes my directives flawlessly. If an executive demands to meet the CEO, David simply tells them the founder prefers the shadows. It creates an aura of exclusivity that Hollywood elites find intoxicating. I chose to remain a ghost primarily to protect myself from Victoria. If my mother ever caught wind of my net worth, she would have weaponized family duty to drain every cent. My drab wardrobe and supposed accounting job were the ultimate camouflage. I sat at my desk and tapped the screen of a standalone encrypted tablet. This device was dedicated to a single communication channel. It connected me directly to the lead silent investor who provided the initial seed funding to scale Meliora 5 years ago. That investor was Thomas Vanguard. The Vanguard family did not just possess money. They possessed generational influence. They owned fleets of cargo ships, commercial real estate in 3 countries, and private equity firms. Thomas Vanguard despised the superficial circus of Los Angeles, but he recognized the financial utility of controlling public perception. He backed my firm because I presented a ruthless, data-driven approach to reputation management. He trusted my vision. We spoke only through encrypted emails and secure lines. He knew me as CM and respected my demand for total privacy. Today, his son Harrison Vanguard was standing at an altar in Bel Air, placing a diamond ring on Serena's finger. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Victoria and Serena believed they had successfully trapped a Vanguard. They thought they had secured a limitless checkbook to save their foreclosed estate and fund their synthetic lifestyle. They assumed the Vanguards were clueless, aristocratic targets. But Thomas Vanguard was no fool. He had a vast intelligence network. He knew exactly how much debt Victoria carried. He knew about the maxed-out credit cards and the leveraged assets. A few months ago, Thomas sent me a secure message asking my opinion on the upcoming union. He admitted he found the mother financially reckless, but he tolerated the marriage for one specific reason. Serena had convinced him she was a savant. During a private dinner in Aspen, Serena had heavily implied to Thomas that she was the rising star of the Los Angeles brand management scene. She dropped industry buzzwords and vaguely took credit for several high-profile campaigns that Meliora had actually designed. Serena essentially painted herself as the next great architect of public perception. She was bad. They treated me like a disposable peasant while desperately courting the very empire that I helped build. They declared war on the architect of their entire social ecosystem without ever realizing I held the blueprints to their destruction. The asymmetrical warfare had officially begun. I did not need to raise my voice or throw a tantrum outside the gates. I just needed to let them continue digging. I opened my primary workstation monitoring the social media traffic surrounding the Bel Air wedding. Serena had enforced a strict embargo on all guest photos, wanting the exclusive Vogue spread to dictate the narrative. But in an era of ubiquitous smartphones, controlling a narrative is like trying to hold water in your bare hands. A notification pinged on my dashboard, then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. The sentiment analysis algorithm on my screen flashed yellow, indicating a sudden spike in negative engagement. I clicked on the source link. The wedding reception had only been underway for an hour, but the pristine facade was already cracking. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the data stream accelerate. Serena thought her perfect day was secured. She was about to learn that the internet is a very unforgiving guest. The data stream on my primary monitor shifted from a steady green to a pulsing yellow, then a stark crimson. I leaned closer to the mahogany desk. In the world of public relations, a crisis does not announce itself with a polite knock. It breaches the hull and drowns you before you realize the ship is sinking. The source of the digital fire was an anonymous burner account on a popular social platform. The user handle hinted at a disgruntled floral vendor who had likely received only a fraction of their promised payment from my mother. The post contained a single high-definition photograph. It was not taken by the hired professionals roaming the pristine lawns. It was her face. The stark contrast between the synthetic tightness of her jawline and the natural movement of her neck was glaring. She looked stretched tight, resembling a porcelain doll pulled too close to an open flame. The caption was brief but lethal. It read that the internet should meet the real future, Mrs. Vanguard, built on plastic debt and a terrible attitude. I watched the engagement metrics skyrocket. The algorithm feeds on authenticity, but it feasts on hypocrisy. Within 10 minutes, the post was shared across a dozen gossip forums. Within 20 minutes, prominent influencer commentary channels were dissecting the raw image. They zoomed in on the surgical scars, comparing them side by side with Serena's heavily airbrushed social media feed. The phrase synthetic socialite began trending locally across Los Angeles. The comments section became a brutal arena. Users quickly tagged the Vanguard family business accounts, questioning their corporate due diligence. Harrison Vanguard represented a lineage of quiet, understated wealth. The internet crowd ruthlessly mocked him for purchasing a counterfeit bride. The carefully constructed illusion Victoria spent years financing with high-interest loans was disintegrating in real time. My private cell phone vibrated against the glass surface of my desk. The caller identification displayed Victoria's name. I let it ring 3 times, regulating my breathing to ensure my voice remained clinical and detached. I swiped the screen to answer. The audio quality was terrible. I could hear the frantic, overlapping voices of wedding planners and the distant, thumping bass of the reception music. Over the noise, Victoria was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. "Calista, you have to help us," Victoria choked out. Her voice carried the high-pitched resonance of a cornered predator. "Have you seen the internet? Have you seen what they are doing to your sister?" "I am looking at the engagement metrics right now," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "The image is gaining significant traction." "Do not talk to me about metrics, you ungrateful child," Victoria shrieked. The Vanguard patriarch is sitting at table 1, looking at his phone and frowning. Harrison is pacing near the ice sculpture. "We are losing control of the narrative. You need to wire your savings account right now." I raised an eyebrow at the empty room. Victoria assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck at my administrative job, hoarding a modest nest egg of perhaps $50,000. She wanted to drain my supposed life savings to fix her catastrophe. "Wire the money to whom?" I asked calmly. "A crisis management firm," Victoria said, her words tumbling together. "One of Serena's bridesmaids knows a digital fixer. He said he can scrub the image issue, copyright takedowns, and flood the tags with positive press. But he requires an immediate retainer, a very large retainer." "Our cards are declining, Calista. The bank froze the primary account this morning. If this wedding falls apart, the bank takes the house. Give me the money." I tapped my pen against the desk. A digital fixer could not scrub an image that was already cached on thousands of independent servers. Victoria was ready to burn my imaginary life savings on a scam artist just to buy herself an hour of false hope. "I cannot authorize a blind wire transfer to an unvetted contractor," I said smoothly. "That is a poor financial decision." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When Victoria spoke again, the frantic edge was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow cruelty. It was the voice of a woman who had abandoned all moral restraints. "You listen to me very carefully," Victoria hissed. "You are a plain, depressed spinster living in a mediocre apartment. I have the contact information for a very discreet probate attorney. If you do not transfer those funds within the next 10 minutes, I will have him file an emergency petition tomorrow morning. I will tell a judge that your erratic behavior at the wedding proves you are a danger to yourself. I will have you declared mentally unfit. I will secure a conservatorship over your assets, and I will take the money anyway." The threat hung in the air. This was the ultimate line crossed. My mother was not just asking for a loan. She was threatening to strip away my legal autonomy, weaponize the judicial system, and institutionalize me simply to protect a plastic surgical secret. She viewed me as nothing more than a disposable resource to be harvested. Any lingering trace of familial obligation I might have harbored evaporated in that exact second. This extortion attempt demonstrated a profound psychological rot. She was willing to lock her eldest daughter in a psychiatric facility to secure a lifestyle brand deal for her youngest. I did not react with anger. Anger implies a loss of control. I felt a pristine clarity. Victoria had just handed me the moral justification to execute my corporate takedown without a single ounce of guilt. I took a slow breath. "I will handle the PR situation," I said. My voice was steady, an icy calm, contrasting her desperation. I pressed the red button on the screen, severing the connection before she could issue another threat. I set the phone down. Victoria undoubtedly mistook my brief response for terrified submission. She likely believed I was logging into my modest bank account to authorize the wire transfer. She assumed the threat of a shady family lawyer had bullied the ugly duckling back into her compliant little box. She failed to realize that the ugly duckling commanded a legal department that could dismantle her probate attorney before breakfast. More importantly, she failed to realize the phrasing of my promise. I said I would handle the PR situation. I never said I would handle it in her favor. I turned my attention back to the primary workstation. The damage to the Vanguard name was accelerating. Thomas Vanguard would not tolerate public humiliation. He demanded flawless discretion from his investments and his family. Serena would know this. She would realize that a random digital fixer recommended by a bridesmaid could not salvage a disaster of this magnitude. Serena would need to aim higher. She would need the elite reputation management firm in the state of California to save her new marriage and secure her future. She would need to pitch a desperate plea to the legendary anonymous founder of Meliora. I opened my encrypted corporate inbox and waited. I knew my sister. I knew her ambition and her unearned arrogance. It was only a matter of time before Serena Vanguard typed out a frantic email begging for a meeting with the very woman she had banished from her wedding just hours prior. The board was set. All I had to do was watch her walk through the front door. 48 hours after the disastrous reception, the expected inquiry arrived. It bypassed the standard intake forms, landing directly in the priority inbox reserved for high-net-worth prospective clients. The subject line read, "Urgent Strategic Partnership Proposal, Serena Vanguard." She had already adopted the surname, wielding it like a newly forged weapon. I sat in my private office, overlooking the hazy expanse of the Los Angeles basin. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Serena Vanguard was requesting an immediate summit with the executive board of Meliora Public Relations. She framed the request as a mutually beneficial opportunity. I knew it was a desperate plea for a life raft. I forwarded the message to my legal director with a single sentence of instruction. I told him to accept the meeting and let her talk. Meliora headquarters occupies the top 3 floors of a brutalist glass structure in Century City. The architecture is deliberately engineered to intimidate. The reception area features polished concrete floors, sparse minimalist art, and zero corporate branding. It is an environment devoid of warmth, designed to remind visitors that they are entering a fortress of logic and consequence. David is the perfect guardian for this fortress. Before joining my firm, he spent a decade dismantling failing tech startups for a ruthless venture capital syndicate. He wears tailored charcoal suits and possesses the empathy of a calculating machine. He acts as my public proxy, executing my directives flawlessly while I remain unseen. I briefed him on the impending visitors early that morning. I provided him with their full financial dossiers, the outstanding loan balances, the leveraged assets, and the impending foreclosure notices. I also disclosed their relation to me. David did not express surprise. He simply nodded, appreciating the sharp geometry of the trap we were building. At 10 o'clock sharp, the high-definition security feed on my monitor flared to life. Serena and Victoria stepped out of the private elevator and into the waiting room. They wore tweed suits bearing the unmistakable stiffness of luxury rental garments. I zoomed the camera in, tracking their movements. Victoria paced the length of the boardroom. She ran a hand over the imported Italian leather chairs, adopting a posture of faux ownership. Serena looked rigid. The surgical scars that had sparked the viral firestorm were concealed beneath heavy layers of studio-grade foundation, but her physical tension betrayed her. She gripped her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. They were drowning women, pretending to be swimming. David entered the room holding a single manila folder. He did not offer coffee or sparkling water. He did not engage in preliminary pleasantries. He sat at the head of the long oak table, folded his hands, and waited. I turned up the audio feed in my office, leaning back in my leather chair. Serena began the performance with a practiced smile. She attempted to deploy her usual synthetic charm, projecting the aura of a rising socialite, inconvenienced by a minor misunderstanding. She tried to frame the viral wedding photograph as a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated by jealous competitors. She spoke of her brand, her demographic, and her future potential. David listened in pristine silence. His refusal to validate her narrative rattled her. The silence stretched, forcing Serena to fill the void with increasingly frantic justifications. Realizing charm was ineffective, she pivoted to perceived authority. She invoked her new father-in-law. She explained that she was marrying into the Vanguard dynasty, presenting the fact as a royal decree that demanded respect. She claimed Thomas Vanguard was eager to see her formalize her public relations endeavors and consolidate her intellectual property. This was a calculated half-truth. Thomas was indeed eager to see results, but Serena was currently empty-handed. He expected her to bring a thriving enterprise into the family portfolio. Instead, she brought liabilities. Then she executed the maneuver that sealed her fate. Serena leaned forward, lowering her voice to project an air of exclusivity. She told David that the industry had spent years trying to guess the identity of Meliora's anonymous founder. She suggested the mystery was a brilliant initial marketing tactic, but one that had finally run its course. She looked David directly in the eye and stated that she was ready to step out of the shadows and claim her rightful place. I paused my breathing. I stared at the high-resolution screen, memorizing the exact curvature of her smile. Serena was not merely asking for corporate representation. She was explicitly implying to my legal director that she was the secret creative mastermind behind my company. She wove a breathtakingly convoluted narrative, claiming she had ghostwritten our most successful campaigns. She stated she provided the strategic direction through anonymous shell accounts, while letting executives like David handle the tedious administrative execution. Her demand was clear. She wanted a formal, multi-million-dollar contract that officially named her as the face and founder of the brand. It was a display of pathological entitlement that bordered on delusion. She intended to steal my corporate identity and present it to the Vanguard family as her own dowry. By securing a monumental public buyout from her own supposed firm, she would magically erase Victoria's hidden debts, generate instantaneous liquid capital, and cement her status as an undeniable business prodigy. She was attempting to use my life's work as a lifeboat for her sinking ship. She believed she could simply walk into a building, spin a web of lies, and walk out with an empire. She assumed the cowardly, anonymous chief executive would never step forward to challenge a well-connected Vanguard bride. She was committing actionable corporate fraud on camera within the walls of the very institution she sought to rob. On the screen, David tilted his head. He possessed the rare ability to convey profound professional respect while simultaneously laying a lethal snare. He asked Serena a simple logistical question. If she already owned the intellectual property, why would she require a formal contract to validate it? Serena smoothly countered that she needed the pristine legal documentation to satisfy the stringent Vanguard family trust requirements. He noted that the board of directors would need assurances. He asked what she was willing to offer the firm to ensure this transition remained seamless and beneficial for his personal career trajectory. Serena's eyes gleamed with unchecked greed. She perceived David not as a formidable gatekeeper, but as a corruptible middleman. She saw an employee she could easily manipulate. She leaned across the oak table, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The audio receptors picked up every nuanced syllable. She told him she understood how corporate politics functioned. She stated she was willing to do whatever it takes to bypass the standard rigorous protocols and expedite the signing process. David asked her to clarify her parameters. She was a woman who had been married for less than 48 hours, offering illicit favors to a stranger to secure a fraudulent contract. I watched my sister volunteer to compromise her brand new, high-profile marriage just to secure a stolen title. She was ready to cross the final boundary of moral decay. She was handing me the exact ammunition required to execute a flawless public takedown. The meeting concluded with David promising to draft the preliminary paperwork. Serena and Victoria exited the boardroom, their postures radiating victorious arrogance. They believed they had outsmarted the system. I reached for my encrypted tablet. The board was no longer just set. The pieces were actively moving into the kill zone. Serena thought she was setting a trap for a gullible executive. She was about to discover what happens when you attempt to seduce the executioner. 3 days passed. In the luxury brand management sector, silence is the most effective psychological weapon. He was undoubtedly asking the newest member of his family for proof of her flourishing enterprise. The fake wealth facade was fracturing, and Serena needed the Meliora contract to serve as her structural reinforcement. David understands the anatomy of panic. On Thursday evening, he attended a scheduled dinner at the Obsidian Club in Beverly Hills. The Obsidian is an institution shielded from the public eye. It requires a rigorous background check, a steep initiation fee, and strict adherence to a no photography rule. It is a sanctuary where the elite conduct discreet transactions. It is also the exact environment where a desperate socialite carrying a brand new aristocratic last name would go hunting for a lifeline. I listened to the pristine audio recording the following morning in my penthouse office. David wears a customized timepiece equipped with a military-grade auditory capture device. It is a standard protocol for all our high-level executive encounters. The audio file captured the ambient clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of jazz music in the background. Then I heard the distinct click of Serena's designer heels approaching the mahogany bar. She did not hesitate. The recording captured her sliding onto the leather stool next to David. She bypassed standard professional greetings entirely. She signaled the bartender and ordered 2 rare scotches, neat. Her voice held a synthetic purr, a drastic departure from the stiff entitlement she displayed in our boardroom just days prior. She was deploying a new strategy. She realized authority had failed, so she pivoted to seduction. David played his part with flawless neutrality. He thanked her for the drink and asked how married life was treating the new Mrs. Vanguard. Serena let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. The sound echoed through the speakers on my desk. She told David that marriage was merely a strategic merger. She explicitly stated that Harrison was a stepping stone, a blank check to fund her true ambitions. I sat perfectly still, listening to my sister casually dismantle the vows she took less than a week ago. She was actively trashing the heir to a billionaire dynasty to a man she believed was a mid-level corporate executive. Her arrogance was blinding. David gently steered the conversation back to business. He informed her that the Meliora board of directors remained hesitant. He cited her lack of verifiable portfolio metrics and suggested the transition of the founder title might take several months of careful deliberation. The audio captured the sharp intake of Serena's breath. Months were a luxury she did not possess. The bank would seize her mother's home in a matter of weeks. The Vanguard patriarch would demand an audit of her supposed company long before the season ended. She was out of time. She lowered her voice even further. The microphone picked up the rustle of fabric, suggesting she had placed her hand on his arm or his thigh. She told David that corporate bureaucracy was a flexible concept for those willing to color outside the lines. She stated she understood his position. He was a handsome, successful man working tirelessly to build someone else's brand. She offered a mutually beneficial shortcut. Serena explicitly promised to be his private Hollywood plaything. She offered an ongoing illicit relationship hidden behind the pristine veil of her new Vanguard status. In exchange, she demanded David manipulate the Meliora board, forge the necessary approvals, and fast-track the founder contract to her desk by Monday morning. She was volunteering to commit infidelity, destroy her high-profile union, and trade her physical autonomy to steal my corporate identity. The moral decay was profound. David remained unfazed. He took a slow sip of his drink and asked a calculated question. He inquired if she truly possessed the bandwidth to maintain a secret affair, manage a global public relations firm, and handle her familial obligations. He asked if anyone in her family might notice her erratic schedule. This was the moment Serena handed me the final nail for her coffin. She scoffed at the mere mention of our family. She told David her mother was easily handled with a fresh line of credit. Then she brought me into the conversation. She needed to elevate her own status by stepping on someone else. She described her older sister Calista as a depressed, plain loser. She told David I worked a pathetic administrative job in a windowless cubicle. She claimed she carried the entire emotional and financial burden of the family because I was too weak and unattractive to secure a meaningful future. She painted herself as the brilliant, gorgeous savior, burdened by a genetic disappointment of a sister. I stopped the recording. The silence in my office was heavy, but not painful. Any lingering shadow of sibling loyalty, any residual guilt I might have felt about the impending execution, vanished. Serena did not just want to succeed. She needed me to fail. She needed me to be a loser to justify her own fraudulent existence. I pressed play and let the recording finish. David gave a non-committal answer. He told Serena her offer was compelling and promised to review the contract parameters over the weekend. He paid his tab and walked away, leaving her sitting at the bar. She undoubtedly thought she had won. She believed she had successfully manipulated a susceptible man with her synthetic charm. She thought her dark secret was safe in the shadows of the Obsidian Club. She failed to comprehend that true power does not sit at a mahogany bar drinking scotch. True power sits in a secure room listening to the audio file. I archived the recording in a secure digital vault alongside the unedited wedding photograph and the financial dossiers. The evidence was mounting into an insurmountable mountain of fraud. Serena had offered infidelity to secure a stolen title. Victoria had threatened forced institutionalization to secure a digital cover-up. They were both reaching for the same life raft without realizing the raft was rigged with explosives. I opened a new drafting window on my workstation. It was time to give Serena exactly what she requested. It was time to draft the founder contract. But this document would not be a standard corporate agreement. It would be a legal labyrinth. It would contain the specific stipulations required to turn her own arrogance into a binding financial prison. I began typing out the parameters for a very specific morality clause. The morning sun crested the Hollywood hills, casting long geometric shadows across the hardwood floor of my penthouse. Monday had arrived. This was the deadline Serena requested during her illicit proposition at the Obsidian Club. She demanded a formal agreement naming her as the founder of my public relations firm. I was ready to grant her wish. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows sipping black coffee while my legal director finalized the instrument of her destruction. David and I spent the entire weekend constructing a bespoke corporate portfolio. We did not use standard industry templates. We engineered a legal labyrinth disguised as a golden ticket. The bait was undeniable. We set the initial signing bonus at $5 million. That specific figure was calculated with surgical precision. It was exactly enough capital to halt the impending foreclosure proceedings against the Bel Air estate. It was enough to pay off Victoria's Secret high-interest credit lines. It provided enough surplus to fund their synthetic lifestyle for another 12 months. By offering such a staggering sum, we ensured their greed would eclipse their caution. The true purpose of the document, however, was buried deep within the fine print. On page 47, under a heading labeled Standard Operational Guidelines, we placed the Authenticity and Ethical Conduct provision. During my early 20s, before I built my current empire, I spent years studying corporate litigation. I analyzed how legacy film studios controlled their talent during the 1920s. They utilized morality clauses to ensure their stars maintained a pristine public image. I modernized that concept for the digital age. The clause I drafted was a lethal corporate snare. It explicitly dictated that the signee must uphold the highest standards of personal and professional integrity. It outlined severe financial penalties for any act of identity theft, corporate misrepresentation, public defamation, or marital infidelity. If the signee breached any of these specific terms, they immediately forfeited the signing bonus and became personally liable for institutional damages to the brand. We set the penalty for violating the ethical provision at $20 million. I authorized David to initiate the meeting. At noon, the security feed on my primary monitor illuminated. Serena and Victoria walked into the Century City boardroom. They looked triumphant. They carried themselves with the inflated posture of conquerors who believed they had successfully manipulated the system. Serena wore a bright tailored suit likely purchased that very morning using the last available fraction of a leveraged credit account. David entered the room carrying the thick, leather-bound portfolio. He projected an aura of mild professional boredom, perfectly masking the lethal nature of the transaction. He slid the heavy stack of paper across the oak table. He verbally highlighted the $5 million compensation package. He watched their eyes widen as the reality of the numbers washed over them. He then casually gestured to the remaining 50 pages, mentioning that the rest was standard industry boilerplate regarding brand alignment and behavioral expectations. He invited them to review the document with their legal counsel before signing. This was the pivotal test. In the upper echelons of California business, a competent entertainment attorney charges over $1,000 an hour to review portfolios of this magnitude. A true industry professional brings a team of agents and litigators to scrutinize every single paragraph. Serena and Victoria brought no one. They were bankrupt, pretending to be royalty. They could not afford to hire legal counsel. Furthermore, their arrogance convinced them they did not need it. They assumed they had outsmarted a vulnerable executive. They believed their own lies. I watched the screen as Victoria waved her hand dismissively at David. She stated that they trusted his discretion and saw no need to delay the process with tedious bureaucracy. Serena did not even bother to turn the pages. She flipped directly to the final leaf of the document. She reached into her designer handbag and produced a silver pen. She inscribed her newly acquired marital name onto the signature line, binding herself to a set of rules she never read. David gathered the portfolio, shook their hands, and escorted them out of the building. Less than an hour later, my personal cellular device chimed on the mahogany desk. It was a notification from a dormant social media platform I rarely utilized. I unlocked the screen. Victoria had updated her public profile. She uploaded a photograph taken at a generic upscale restaurant in Beverly Hills. The image framed Serena and Victoria holding plastic flutes of cheap, sparkling wine. The vintage was a glaring downgrade from the expensive champagne they used to consume, but they held the glasses high, posing with practiced, artificial smiles. The signature page of the Meliora portfolio rested prominently on the table in front of them. The caption below the photograph was a targeted, emotional strike. Victoria explicitly tagged my dormant account. She typed a message meant to inflict maximum psychological pain. She wrote that some people are born for greatness, while others are destined to watch from the sidelines. She added a final sentence offering insincere pity. She wrote, "Sorry you could not make the cut, Calista." I stared at the glowing pixels. I felt no sorrow. I felt no residual sting of maternal rejection. I only felt a profound sense of vindication. They had just secured a $5 million lifeline. They believed they had saved their home, elevated their social standing, and solidified a counterfeit legacy. Yet their very first instinct upon achieving this monumental victory was to publicly mock the family's scapegoat. They needed to ensure I felt small so they could feel tall. The cruelty was the point. The post also served a secondary function. It was documented proof of public defamation, fulfilling one of the specific triggers within the ethical conduct provision they just signed. Victoria had handed me the evidence on a silver platter. Late that afternoon, a private corporate courier arrived at the restricted lobby of my residential building. He carried a secure lockbox containing the physical portfolio. I retrieved the package and brought it up to the penthouse. I laid the heavy document flat on my desk. The scent of fresh ink and premium paper filled the quiet room. I turned to the final page, observing the sharp, looping letters of Serena Vanguard. Her signature represented a staggering sequence of crimes. It represented the theft of my intellectual property, the deception of her new husband, and the culmination of a lifelong campaign to erase my existence. I uncapped my own fountain pen. I pressed the golden nib against the paper, resting my hand below hers. I inscribed my true name. The ink settled into the fibers binding the agreement into binding law. The trap was now armed, perfectly legal, and entirely inescapable. I closed the leather cover. The preliminary phase of the operation was complete. The fraudulent foundation was poured and set. Now the structure needed to be tested. Serena possessed the forged paperwork. She believed she owned my empire. Her next strategic maneuver was entirely predictable. She needed to parade this stolen crown in front of the man who wielded true authority. She needed to present the founder title to Thomas Vanguard to prove she was worthy of his dynasty. To accomplish this, she would arrange a formal gathering. She would force a private dinner, uniting her newly minted aristocratic in-laws with her own family. She would undoubtedly mandate my attendance. She would need her drab, unremarkable older sister sitting across the table to serve as a visual contrast to her glowing success. She was preparing to march her counterfeit victory directly into the inner sanctum of the very man who quietly financed my existence. The collision course was set. The Vanguard dinner would become the ultimate pressure cooker, and I would have a front row seat to watch the temperature rise. 72 hours after my signature bound the corporate snare, my phone illuminated with a text message. Serena was summoning me. She orchestrated a private dinner at a notoriously exclusive Michelin-starred French restaurant in Beverly Hills. The invitation was not an olive branch. It was a tactical deployment. She needed to present a cohesive, loving family dynamic to her new aristocratic in-laws. To achieve this illusion, she required a prop. I was the designated prop. Victoria called shortly after the text arrived to dictate my wardrobe. She instructed me to wear a shapeless beige cardigan from 3 seasons ago and the heavy tortoiseshell glasses I had snapped in half days prior. I purchased a duplicate pair from a generic pharmacy on my way home. Victoria wanted me to look unremarkable, hoping my manufactured mediocrity would elevate Serena's synthetic glow by comparison. They desired a pathetic plain sister to highlight the bride's supposed grace and charity. I complied without protest. Stepping into the disguise felt different this time. It was no longer a prison. It was tactical camouflage. I was about to share a meal with the silent architect of my wealth, and I needed to observe him in his natural environment. I arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. The maitre d' guided me through a maze of dimly lit tables to a secluded private dining alcove draped in heavy velvet curtains. The Vanguard men were already seated. Thomas Vanguard commanded the head of the oak table. He possessed the quiet, unmistakable gravity of a man who moved global markets with a single signature. He wore a tailored navy suit that whispered of bespoke craftsmanship rather than screaming of designer labels. His son Harrison sat beside him, looking polished but undeniably fatigued. The weight of his week-old marriage was already settling heavily upon his shoulders. Serena and Victoria occupied the opposite side, dripping in borrowed diamonds and the desperate energy of imposters. When I approached the table, Victoria let out a theatrical sigh, audibly lamenting my beige cardigan. She offered an insincere apology to Thomas, claiming I struggled with social presentation due to my mundane lifestyle. Serena chimed in, placing a condescending hand on my arm, stating she loved me regardless of my shortcomings. I took my seat. I did not shrink. I maintained perfect posture, meeting Thomas Vanguard's gaze. He did not look at me with the pity my mother tried to solicit. His eyes narrowed slightly, processing the stark contrast between the mother's cruel commentary and my serene, unbothered demeanor. Men who build global empires are human lie detectors. They recognize when a narrative feels engineered. The first course arrived featuring delicate plates of seared scallops and caviar. Victoria spent the appetizer phase attempting to dominate the airspace with tales of her country club philanthropy. It was a transparent effort to match the Vanguard pedigree. Harrison shifted uncomfortably, poking at his food. He was beginning to notice the shrill cadence of his mother-in-law's ambition. Thomas, however, shifted his attention away from the performance. He turned his imposing focus toward me. He asked about my profession, noting that Serena rarely discussed my career. Victoria quickly interjected, waving her silver fork, dismissing my work as low-level data entry in a windowless back room. I smoothly corrected her, keeping my tone respectful but firm. I stated that I managed complex logistical data sets and risk assessment protocols for a corporate entity. Thomas leaned forward, intrigued by the precision of my vocabulary. He asked my opinion on the current market volatility affecting overseas shipping logistics. It was a subtle test of my actual intellect, a probe to see if the plain sister possessed any real substance. I delivered an analytical response. I referenced shifting geopolitical tariffs and supply chain bottlenecks, offering a concise summary of how predictive modeling could mitigate quarterly losses. I spoke the language of boardrooms, veiled beneath the guise of a diligent clerical worker. I gave him the exact strategic logic I used when drafting his quarterly Meliora investment reports, disguised as casual dinner conversation. A spark of genuine respect flared in Thomas's eyes. He recognized competence. He nodded, preparing a follow-up inquiry regarding economic forecasting. Serena panicked. The spotlight was drifting toward the shadow, and she could not tolerate the shift. She abruptly interrupted her new father-in-law, her voice artificially loud. She steered the dialogue back to her favorite subject, which was herself. She boasted about her impending luxury brand deals. She heavily implied that a major public relations firm was courting her for a monumental executive transition. She used the word visionary to describe her own potential. She promised Thomas that her upcoming corporate announcement would add immense modern value to the Vanguard legacy. I watched Harrison close his eyes for a fraction of a second. The exhaustion on his face deepened. He was watching his bride transform into a hollow billboard. He married a woman he thought was a grounded rising star, but he was currently dining with a frantic salesperson. Thomas listened to Serena's self-promotion with an unreadable expression. He was a seasoned investor who valued quiet execution over loud promises. Serena was offering him nothing but noise. The tension in the private alcove thickened into something tangible. The vanguards were polite, adhering to the strict codes of high society manners, but the cracks in Serena's facade were spiderwebbing across the table. They were seeing the synthetic nature of her charm and the toxic foundation of her family. Dessert was served in strained silence. Victoria tried to salvage the mood by ordering an expensive vintage of port wine, seemingly forgetting she lacked the liquid funds to settle the bill. When the leather-bound check folder arrived, Harrison quietly intercepted it, paying the exorbitant total without looking at the itemized receipt. Victoria exhaled a breath she had been holding for 20 minutes. I observed every micro-expression, gathering the final intelligence required for my operation. Thomas Vanguard was a man of integrity. He respected intellect and despised charlatans. He would not hesitate to sever ties with a fraudulent asset, even if that asset was his new daughter-in-law. He was already skeptical of her value. All he needed was concrete proof of her deception. As the evening concluded, we moved toward the valet stand outside the restaurant. The cool night air offered a brief respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. Serena cornered me near a row of sculpted hedges while the men waited for their vehicles. Her grip on my forearm was tight, her acrylic nails digging into the beige wool of my cardigan. She whispered a venomous warning, telling me to stop trying to sound intelligent in front of her new family. She accused me of deliberately trying to embarrass her by using big words I did not understand. She told me I was jeopardizing her empire and ordered me to return to my miserable, invisible life. I pulled my arm free, offering her a cold, empty smile. I did not bother to defend my intellect. I simply watched the terror dancing behind her eyes. I knew her desperation was reaching critical mass. She needed to validate the grandiose lies she told Thomas tonight. She promised him a thriving enterprise and visionary status. She needed tangible proof of her imaginary clout, and she needed it immediately. The counterfeit founder contract sitting in her possession was no longer just a trophy to mock me with. It was about to become collateral. Her injured pride and her fear of exposure were pushing her toward the ultimate financial crime, setting the perfect stage for the next phase of the corporate trap. The 48 hours following the Vanguard dinner marked a distinct shift in my sister's methodology. Surviving the Michelin-starred interrogation without immediate exposure emboldened Serena. She possessed the physical portfolio bearing her signature. In her mind, the ink on that paper transformed her fictional narrative into an undeniable reality. She no longer felt the need to whisper her lies in private dining alcoves or discreet hotel bars. She decided it was time to broadcast her counterfeit supremacy to the entire city. My morning routine typically involves reviewing global market fluctuations and sentiment analysis for my primary clients. By Wednesday, however, my own firm became the trending topic across several prominent entertainment industry monitors. I sat in my West Hollywood office watching the data aggregate on my secondary screen. The initial spark ignited on a highly trafficked anonymous gossip blog. The platform serves as the digital water cooler for the Los Angeles elite, thriving on unverified whispers and blind items. The post was carefully worded, but painfully obvious to anyone within our social radius. It asked which newly minted aristocratic bride was preparing to step out of the shadows and formally claim her throne as the secret architect behind the most exclusive public relations empire in California. It was a textbook media plant. Serena was orchestrating her own press leak. By the afternoon, the blind item mutated into localized news articles. Mid-tier entertainment websites began running speculative pieces linking Serena Vanguard to Meliora. She fueled the fire by posting curated images on her social media channels. She uploaded photographs of herself walking out of our Century City headquarters carrying a sleek leather briefcase. She captioned the posts with vague, inspirational quotes about building legacies and stepping into power. She was meticulously constructing a public persona using my life's work as the foundational bricks. This was a dangerous escalation. Stealing a title in a private conversation is a localized deception. Broadcasting that theft to millions of followers transforms the lie into corporate identity theft. Yet the public relations stunt was merely a smokescreen for her true objective. Serena did not just desire digital applause. She required immediate liquid capital. The Vanguard family wealth was vast, but it was locked behind ironclad trusts and generational legal structures. Harrison could not simply hand his new wife a blank check without triggering alarms within his father's accounting department. Serena needed a bridge loan to rescue her mother from impending ruin, and she needed it fast. David entered my office later that week carrying a single encrypted flash drive. He placed it on the glass surface of my desk. He did not wear his usual expression of mild professional detachment. His jaw was set, indicating a serious breach of protocol. He informed me that our corporate legal department had intercepted a verification inquiry from a boutique private wealth bank located in the financial district of downtown Los Angeles. These institutions cater specifically to high-net-worth individuals operating on the promise of future earnings rather than current liquid assets. They are the financial enablers of the Hollywood elite. I plugged the drive into my secure terminal. The screen populated with digitized financial documents. Serena had walked into the bank and applied for a staggering high-yield revolving line of credit. To secure the funds, she did not offer physical collateral. She offered the Meliora contract. She utilized the unearned $5 million signing bonus outlined in the Trojan Horse portfolio as proof of guaranteed future income. She sat across from a loan officer and presented herself as the undeniable founder and incoming chief executive of my company. She leveraged the reputation I spent 5 grueling years building in the shadows to guarantee a loan she had no intention of ever repaying through legitimate means. The bank, dazzled by the Vanguard name and the sheer audacity of her presentation, approved the application. They issued her a premium credit instrument with an astronomical borrowing limit. The ramifications were profound. Serena was no longer just playing dress-up. She had weaponized my corporate identity to commit financial fraud against a federally regulated institution. If she defaulted on those exorbitant interest payments, the bank would initiate collection protocols. They would attempt to garnish her projected wages. They would subpoena Meliora, demanding explanations and potentially dragging my pristine brand into a messy public litigation. In the business of reputation management, trust is the only currency that matters. If the public believed my firm was entangled in a fraudulent banking scheme, clients would flee. Serena was effectively gambling with the structural integrity of my entire empire to fund her vanity. I reviewed the expenditure logs David managed to legally acquire through back-channel financial audits. The moment the credit line became active, the spending spree commenced. Victoria wasted no time. She executed a wire transfer to halt the foreclosure proceedings on the Bel Air estate, pulling their home back from the precipice of auction. She paid off the delinquent balances on her luxury vehicles. She began booking extravagant vacations and purchasing fresh designer wardrobes. They were celebrating their survival using stolen equity. They were throwing a lavish party on the deck of a ship they did not own. Growing up, I watched Victoria navigate the world through a lens of pure superficiality. She believed looking wealthy was more important than actually generating wealth. I chose the opposite path. I poured my energy into mastering data analytics, market psychology, and corporate law. I learned how to build actual value, while they mastered the art of faking it. Now their fake reality was actively cannibalizing my actual value. Serena operated under a fatal assumption. She believed her highly visible public posturing would paralyze me. She calculated that the anonymous founder who hid behind non-disclosure agreements and proxies for half a decade was inherently cowardly. She assumed I lacked the fortitude to step into the light and challenge a woman bearing the Vanguard crest. She thought her aristocratic shield rendered her untouchable. She failed to understand that I did not hide in the shadows out of fear. I operated in the shadows because it offered the clearest vantage point to observe the battlefield. I closed the financial dossiers on my monitor. The anger I expected to feel was absent. Instead, a cold, clinical resolve settled over me. Serena had elevated the conflict from a familial dispute to a matter of corporate survival. She forced my hand. I pressed the intercom button on my desk, connecting to David. I instructed him to ignore the bank inquiry for the time being. I told him to let the loan process without interference. We would not correct the record today. We would let Serena draw the maximum amount of illicit funds. We would let Victoria redecorate her house with stolen money. We would allow the tension to stretch until the cord was ready to snap. David asked for clarification on our timeline. He noted the annual Meliora Industry Gala was scheduled for the end of the month. I confirmed his unspoken suggestion. The gala was the most exclusive event of the California social calendar. It was a gathering of every significant investor, media mogul, and cultural influencer in the state. It was the exact venue Serena would choose to unveil herself to the world as the triumphant queen of public relations. She was planning to use my stage for her coronation. I decided to let her walk up the steps. I would let her put on the crown. I would wait until the entire city was watching before I shattered the illusion. The corporate trap was fully armed. The financial crimes were documented. The media narrative was set. The only remaining variable was the precise moment of execution. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel stands as a monument to the golden age of cinema. It hosted the very first Academy Awards, and its Spanish colonial architecture whispers of decades of manufactured glamour. Tonight, however, it served a different purpose. It was the designated stage for the annual Meliora Public Relations Gala. The stretch of Hollywood Boulevard outside the main entrance was cordoned off by city police. Searchlights carved geometric patterns into the evening smog. A red carpet, flanked by velvet ropes and a small army of credentialed photographers, led into the grand lobby. I did not enter through the front doors. I arrived hours earlier, utilizing the secure subterranean loading dock. I sat in the presidential suite directly above the main ballroom, watching the live security feeds on a portable monitor. The California social season demands visibility, and my sister was determined to be the brightest object in the hemisphere. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. The rear door opened, and Serena stepped out into the blinding crossfire of camera flashes. She wore a cascading silver gown that caught the ambient light resembling liquid mercury. A diamond collar rested against her collarbone. Every stitch of fabric, every faceted gemstone, was financed by the fraudulent credit instrument she obtained using my stolen corporate identity. Victoria exited the vehicle right behind her. My mother wore a structured plum dress, adopting the haughty posture of a dowager empress. She waved to the photographers, acting as though she personally built the institution they were attending. I turned up the audio on the feed. A prominent entertainment correspondent pushed a microphone toward Serena, asking about the rumors circulating in the industry press. The reporter asked if tonight was the night the anonymous founder of Meliora would finally step out of the shadows. Serena offered a practiced, demure smile. She tilted her chin, allowing the camera to capture the synthetic angles of her surgical enhancements. She replied that innovation requires bold leadership, and she was thrilled to share her creative vision with the world tonight. She openly thanked her new husband, Harrison Vanguard, for supporting her entrepreneurial spirit. She was laying the final bricks of her own tomb. She was officially claiming my empire on a recorded broadcast. She believed she owned the building. She thought the gala was her personal coronation. I turned away from the monitor and pressed the power button. The screen faded to black. I had seen enough of the illusion. It was time to prepare the reality. Julian stood across the room. The celebrity makeup artist had unpacked his iconic silver kit across the mahogany vanity. The suite smelled of expensive setting spray and ozone. He looked at me with a steady, evaluating gaze. For 28 years, I dressed in armor designed to make me invisible. I wore oversized beige cardigans, thick tortoiseshell glasses, and muted colors that washed away my vitality. Victoria engineered that aesthetic to ensure I never threatened her golden child. I reached up and pulled the heavy glasses from my face. I dropped them into the wastebasket beside the desk. I unbuttoned the drab gray blouse I wore to the hotel, letting it fall away. I walked over to the vanity and sat in the plush leather chair. Julian did not offer sympathetic platitudes. He understood the gravity of the evening. He picked up a soft brush and began to work. He did not use heavy contouring or thick layers of foundation. He did not need to sculpt a new face because the underlying architecture was already flawless. He simply enhanced what nature had provided. He applied a sheer, luminous base that caught the light. He used a subtle bronze to define the sharp, natural sweep of my cheekbones. He brushed my brows and applied a deep, precise crimson color to my lips. It was not the face of a victim. It was the face of an apex predator. I looked into the mirror. The resemblance to Serena was undeniable, but the distinction was profound. Her beauty was a tight, anxious imitation, stretched over a framework of debt and insecurity. My reflection projected a calm, effortless authority. The namesake my mother resented so deeply was finally visible. Calista Meliora. Most beautiful. Better. Julian stepped back and nodded. He packed his brushes away in silence, acknowledging that his part in the operation was complete. I stood up and walked toward the center of the suite. A velvet dress form held the final piece of the transition. It was a custom-tailored gown crafted from heavy emerald silk. I chose the color deliberately. It represented the antithesis of the faded neutrals my family forced upon me. It was a hue of wealth, power, and sharp, unyielding life. I stepped into the garment, the fabric draped over my frame, gripping my waist and cascading to the floor like liquid glass. The design featured a structured, asymmetrical neckline that highlighted my collarbones and a high slit that allowed for fluid, purposeful movement. I secured a pair of minimalist gold heels. I did not wear a necklace. The dress and the posture required no further ornamentation. A sharp knock echoed from the heavy wooden door of the suite. David entered the room. My legal director wore a classic black tuxedo. His usual expression of mild corporate boredom was replaced by a look of sharp, focused anticipation. He held a small digital tablet detailing the logistical parameters of the ballroom below. He stopped a few feet away, taking in the transformation. He offered a singular, respectful nod. We conducted a rapid status check. David confirmed that all primary targets were positioned perfectly. Thomas Vanguard occupied the center seat at Table 1, situated directly in front of the main stage. Harrison sat beside him, looking visibly strained, checking his watch every few minutes. Serena and Victoria were seated at an adjacent VIP table, actively networking and accepting premature congratulations from rival agency executives. The media pool was sequestered in the designated press pit flanking the stage, with unobstructed sightlines. The audiovisual technicians located in the control booth possessed the encrypted drive containing the contracts, the audio recordings, and the financial dossiers. The perimeter was secured. The trap was locked. David handed me a small wireless earpiece. I placed it into my right ear, concealing it beneath my hair. It connected me directly to the event stage manager. We left the presidential suite walking shoulder to shoulder down the private service corridors of the Roosevelt. The plush carpeting absorbed the sound of our footsteps. We bypassed the bustling kitchens and the staging areas, navigating the hidden arteries of the hotel. As we descended the final stairwell, the ambient noise of the grand ballroom bled through the walls. I could hear the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the low hum of 500 overlapping conversations, and the rhythmic pulse of a string quartet playing a modern arrangement. It echoed the sensory experience of Serena's wedding day. The variables were identical. The elite crowd the flashing lights, the suffocating pressure of societal expectation. But the power dynamic was entirely inverted. I was no longer the outcast sitting on a stone bench holding a bribe. I was the architect holding the detonator. We reached the staging area. Heavy, black velvet curtains separated us from the main room. A network of cables and lighting rigs crisscrossed the ceiling above us. The event manager caught my eye and held up a hand, signaling a standby hold. Through the earpiece, I heard the audio feed from the primary podium microphone. The string quartet faded into a dramatic, sustained chord. The conversations in the ballroom hushed. A prominent industry veteran serving as the master of ceremonies for the evening stepped up to the microphone. His deep, resonant voice filled the cavernous space. He spoke about the evolution of public relations. He praised the relentless pursuit of authenticity in a digital world drowning in fabrication. He noted that one firm had set the gold standard for the entire industry, operating with unparalleled discretion and visionary strategy. He announced that the time for secrecy had passed. He declared that the architect of this empire was finally ready to step into the light. The ballroom erupted into applause. Serena was undoubtedly rising from her chair, preparing to walk toward the stairs. She was ready to claim the applause. She was ready to accept the crown. The announcer raised his voice over the cheering crowd, commanding their attention. He called the name of the founder and chief executive officer of Meliora. The velvet curtains parted. The spotlights shifted. It was time to show the world the true face of the brand. The main ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel hummed with the specific frequency of elite anticipation. 500 influential figures murmured over crystal-fluted drinks. Above them, the vintage chandeliers dimmed, shifting the ambiance from a mere social gathering to a theatrical focal point. I stood hidden behind the heavy velvet curtain at the top landing of the grand staircase. The cool fabric brushed against my bare shoulder. My breathing remained steady, measured, and calm. Down below, the master of ceremonies leaned into the chrome microphone stand. His voice echoed off the gilded ceiling, detailing the mythos of a company built in the shadows. He spoke of visionary strategy, of flawless corporate execution, and of an anonymous founder who redefined the modern landscape of public relations. From my elevated vantage point, I possessed a clear line of sight directly to the VIP tables. Serena sat upright, her posture rigid with expectation. She adjusted the diamond collar resting against her throat. Her new husband, Harrison, stared blankly at his empty dessert plate, appearing exhausted by the sheer gravity of his wife's relentless ambition. Beside them, Victoria wore a triumphant smirk, already accepting the envious glances of nearby agency executives. When the announcer declared that the era of anonymity was over, Serena actually placed her hands on the edge of the tablecloth, preparing to stand. She shifted her weight, ready to walk into the center aisle. She anticipated the warm embrace of the spotlight. She believed the fraudulent narrative she spun into the Hollywood press had successfully forced my hand, giving her the ultimate unearned victory. The master of ceremonies paused, letting the silence stretch across the cavernous room. Then he spoke the name. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary founder and chief executive officer of Meliora, Calista. A lone, pristine beam of white light ignited from the balcony rigs. It did not swing toward the VIP tables. It did not illuminate the silver gown of the newly minted aristocratic bride. The beam sliced through the darkness and anchored itself directly onto the top landing of the grand staircase. The velvet curtain parted. I took my first step forward. The emerald silk of my custom dress caught the illumination, shimmering like liquid jade. The tailored cut of the fabric moved with fluid purpose, a sharp contrast to the stiff, rented couture populating the floor below. I did not wear thick tortoiseshell glasses. I did not wear an oversized beige cardigan designed to wash out my vitality. I presented the raw, unedited architecture of my face. The sheer, luminous makeup Julian applied highlighted the natural symmetry and the sharp, elegant jawline that Serena had paid a fortune to artificially replicate. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. In an industry dominated by synthetic enhancements and digital filters, raw authenticity possesses an undeniable gravitational pull. The audience stared. They saw the physical embodiment of the brand ethos they worshipped. They recognized the namesake. Calista translates to most beautiful. I descended the carpeted steps with measured, deliberate pacing. Every camera in the press pit pivoted simultaneously. The rapid-fire click of mechanical shutters sounded like a sudden downpour of rain. Halfway down the staircase, I locked my vision onto my family. The visual destruction of their reality occurred in slow motion. Serena froze, half risen from her velvet chair. Her fingers went slack. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her grasp. It struck the polished marble floor, shattering into 100 glittering shards. The sharp acoustic crack pierced the ambient noise of the ballroom, but she did not flinch. Her eyes were wide, fixed entirely on my face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind the stark, unnatural contrast of her heavy studio foundation. She stared at the original blueprint of her own surgical alterations. The older sister she mocked as a depressed plain loser was currently descending from the rafters, cloaked in undeniable authority. Victoria sat paralyzed, her jaw parted slightly. The haughty posture of the Dowager Empress collapsed inward. She looked at the emerald gown, then at my face, and finally at the imposing figure of David, standing near the podium, holding a familiar leather-bound portfolio. The mental calculus registered behind her eyes. The pieces of the puzzle connected with devastating clarity. The drab clothing, the windowless administrative job, the quiet compliance, all of it was tactical camouflage. The anonymous executive who granted her daughter a $5 million signing bonus was the same woman she had threatened to institutionalize just days prior. The snare she willingly walked into suddenly materialized around her. Her face turned the color of cold ash. Beside them, a different realization unfolded. Thomas Vanguard, the patriarch of the dynasty, did not look shocked. He looked enlightened. He observed the stark terror radiating from his daughter-in-law and the pale, trembling frame of her mother. Then he looked up at me. He studied the quiet confidence in my stride, the analytical calm in my expression. He recognized the intellect that had parsed global shipping logistics over a plate of seared scallops just a few nights ago. He saw the elusive partner who had multiplied his initial seed investment tenfold. Thomas slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He did not look at Serena. He directed his attention entirely to the approaching chief executive. He brought his hands together, initiating a slow, deliberate applause. The gesture cascaded through the room. The initial shock of the crowd transitioned into a standing ovation. 500 industry titans rose to their feet, applauding the revelation. I reached the bottom of the staircase and walked down the center aisle. The path led directly past the Vanguard table. I did not alter my pace. As I approached their seating arrangement, the sheer proximity forced Serena to shrink backward into her chair. Her chest heaved with panicked, uneven breaths. The illusion of her supremacy was atomized, leaving only the brittle shell of a terrified imposter. I paused for a fraction of a second when I reached Victoria. I turned my head, meeting my mother's horrified gaze. For 2 decades, she dictated my worth. She commanded me to hide, to shrink, to accept the scraps of her affection while she polished her golden child. She expected me to harbor resentment, or perhaps a desperate, lingering need for her validation. I offered her neither. My expression remained a pristine, blank slate. The look I gave her contained no warmth, no anger, and no sorrow. It was the clinical, evaluating stare of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt account. The dynamic between us shattered permanently in that unspoken exchange. She was no longer a towering matriarch capable of inflicting emotional wounds. She was a financial liability caught in the jaws of her own hubris. I turned my attention forward, completing the final sequence of steps to the main stage. David stepped aside, offering a respectful nod as I took my position behind the clear acrylic podium. The microphone stood ready. Behind me, a towering digital display cast a soft glow over my shoulders, illuminating the space with the corporate logo I built from nothing. The applause began to taper off as the audience sensed the impending address. The attendees expected a standard corporate victory speech. They anticipated a generic narrative about innovation, future branding, and synergistic market disruption. They were entirely unprepared for the reality of the agenda. The coronation portion of the evening was officially over. The corporate execution was about to begin. I looked out over the sea of expectant faces, preparing to dismantle the synthetic reality my sister had built using my stolen name. The polished surface of the clear acrylic podium felt cool beneath my fingertips, grounding me in the present moment. The applause faded, replaced by a profound, expectant silence. 500 pairs of eyes tracked my every movement. I looked out over the sea of faces, recognizing studio heads, venture capitalists, and media magnates. These were the architects of culture, and they were waiting for my directive. I adjusted the microphone. The subtle scrape of metal echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, commanding total attention. California is a state built on the beauty of reinvention, I began. My voice projected clear and steady, carrying no trace of the nervous tremor my mother spent decades trying to instill in me. We live in an ecosystem that rewards the perfect filter, the curated narrative, and the flawless facade. But Meliora operates on a different frequency. We demand raw authenticity. I let the words settle over the crowd. In the front row, Thomas Vanguard offered a subtle, approving tilt of his head. He understood the thesis. A brand is a promise, I continued, pacing my delivery. It is a covenant between a creator and the public. When that covenant is breached by deception, the foundation crumbles. We do not tolerate structural decay. We eliminate it. I reached into the hidden compartment of the podium and produced a sleek black remote control. I pressed the primary button. Behind me, the towering digital display flared to life. The high-definition panels cast a stark white glow over my shoulders. The screen populated with a crisp, scanned image of a legal document. It was the final page of the founder transition portfolio. Serena's signature sat rendered in stark black ink, a looping testament to her own arrogance. 3 days ago, an individual attempted to claim ownership of this firm, I stated, addressing the room. She requested a formal contract transferring the title of founder to her name, along with a rather generous compensation package. We provided the paperwork. I clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in, highlighting a specific, dense paragraph located above the signature line. A bright yellow digital marker painted over the text, illuminating the ethical conduct provision. This is the authenticity and morality clause, I explained, my tone resembling a professor delivering a lecture on forensic accounting. It stipulates that any act of corporate misrepresentation, identity theft, public defamation, or marital infidelity constitutes a terminal breach. Violating these terms revokes all compensation and triggers a severe financial penalty to repair institutional damages. The signee agreed to these terms without consulting legal counsel. A low murmur rippled through the press pit. The journalists were beginning to smell the blood in the water. I shifted my gaze directly to the VIP section. Serena sat frozen in her velvet chair. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and erratic. The illusion she constructed was unraveling, thread by thread, but the true devastation was yet to come. Unfortunately, I said, pressing the remote a third time, the signee failed to uphold her end of the bargain. The visual on the screen faded, replaced by a stark black background featuring a single oscillating audio waveform. I did not need to provide context. The recording spoke for itself. The acoustic environment of the Obsidian Club poured through the ballroom speakers. The clinking of crystal glasses and soft jazz music established the setting. Then Serena's voice filled the room. It was not the polished, demure tone she utilized for the paparazzi outside the hotel. It was the synthetic, predatory purr she reserved for manipulation. The audience listened in stunned silence as my sister propositioned my legal director. They heard her offer to become his private plaything in exchange for expediting the fraudulent contract. I watched Harrison Vanguard. The young heir sat rigid at table 1. As his wife's voice echoed across the gala, offering illicit favors to a stranger less than a week after their wedding, the color drained from his face. His posture, the relaxed confidence of generational wealth, collapsed. He was listening to the destruction of his own marriage, broadcast to the entire Los Angeles elite. The recording continued. Serena's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. She detailed her disdain for her new husband. She called him boring old money, lacking vision and purpose. She explicitly stated he was nothing more than a stepping stone to fund her true ambitions. Harrison closed his eyes. The humiliation etched itself into the tense lines around his mouth. He did not look at Serena. He simply stared at the pristine white tablecloth, processing the betrayal. The audio file concluded with Serena actively trashing her own family, referring to her older sister as a depressed, plain loser, to elevate her own perceived value. The silence that followed the recording was heavy, toxic, and suffocating. I did not offer the crowd a moment to recover. I pressed the remote again. The screen illuminated with a new set of documents. These were the internal files from the boutique private wealth bank in downtown Los Angeles. The paperwork detailed a staggering high-yield revolving line of credit. Infidelity and public defamation are personal failures, I told the captivated audience. But leveraging stolen intellectual property to commit bank fraud is a corporate liability. I pointed to the digitized bank statements. The individual used the unearned signing bonus from our provisional contract as collateral to secure this credit instrument. She presented herself to federal regulators as the chief executive of Meliora. She utilized my life's work, my equity, to fund a lavish personal lifestyle and pay off undisclosed family debts. This transcends vanity. This is actionable corporate identity theft. The journalists in the press pit were furiously typing on their illuminated devices. The story was no longer a simple piece of industry gossip. It was a multi-million-dollar financial scandal unfolding in real time. I reached into the podium and withdrew a single sheet of heavy parchment paper alongside a gold fountain pen. "We do not reward fraud," I stated, my voice cutting through the rising tension in the room. "We do not harbor parasites within this organization." I placed the termination document on the acrylic surface. I uncapped the pen. "Effective immediately," I announced, looking down at the paper. Meliora Public Relations legally severs all ties with Serena Vanguard. The provisional contract is terminated with extreme prejudice. The $5 million signing bonus is officially revoked. I pressed the gold nib against the parchment, signing my name with swift, precise strokes. Furthermore, I added, capping the pen and looking back up at the silent crowd, per the stipulations of the morality clause, the terminal breach penalty is now active. The signee is personally liable for $20 million in institutional damages. Our legal department will file the necessary injunctions tomorrow morning. I did not raise my voice. I did not project anger, vengeance, or sorrow. My delivery was surgical, factual, and entirely devoid of pity. I executed the corporate takedown with the same clinical precision I used to build the firm. I used her own signature, her own words, and her own greed to construct a flawless, undeniable trap. The illusion was dead. The reality was exposed. I stepped back from the podium, leaving the termination document resting under the bright stage lights. The echo of my final sentence hung in the cavernous ballroom. No one clapped. No one cheered. The audience remained trapped in a state of suspended animation, processing the sheer brutality of the revelation. Down in the VIP section, the paralysis broke. Harrison Vanguard placed his hands flat on the table and slowly pushed his chair back. The scraping sound of the wooden legs against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot, signaling the beginning of the immediate and catastrophic fallout. The scrape of Harrison Vanguard pushing his wooden chair across the polished marble floor echoed like a gavel striking a block. The sound shattered the paralysis gripping the VIP section. Harrison did not shout. He did not flip the table or exhibit any crude loss of emotional control. He belonged to a lineage that viewed public outbursts as a symptom of the lower classes. Instead, he operated with the chilling efficiency of a man excising a tumor. He stood up and looked down at his bride. Serena reached a trembling hand toward his tuxedo jacket. Her acrylic nails hovered inches from the dark wool. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Harrison stepped backward, avoiding her touch as if she carried a lethal contagion. He reached into his inner pocket and retrieved his cellular device. He pressed a single button on speed dial, raising the phone to his ear. The ballroom remained quiet enough that his voice carried across the front rows. He instructed the person on the other end of the line to awaken his lead defense attorney. He stated clearly that he required expedited annulment paperwork drafted before sunrise. He cited the legal grounds as extreme financial misrepresentation, fraudulent inducement, and profound moral turpitude. He did not wait for a response. He terminated the call, returned the device to his pocket, and turned his back on the woman he married less than a week prior. Thomas Vanguard rose from his seat a moment later. The patriarch did not spare a single glance for the weeping bride or her petrified mother. He looked up at the stage, meeting my eyes. He offered a slow, deliberate nod of profound respect. It was the silent acknowledgement of a senior partner recognizing a flawless corporate maneuver. Thomas adjusted his cuffs, turned, and followed his son out of the Roosevelt Hotel. The Vanguard dynasty excised the parasitic infection in less than 60 seconds. The departure of the lead investors broke the remaining tension in the room. The social fallout was instantaneous. In the upper echelons of Los Angeles society, wealth and influence are the only acceptable forms of currency. The moment the elite crowd realized my family possessed neither, they initiated a brutal, swift quarantine. Victoria, desperate to salvage any fragment of her manufactured reality, turned toward the adjacent table. She reached out to a prominent studio executive she had been boastfully lecturing just 20 minutes earlier. She attempted to force a strained, artificial smile onto her face. The executive physically recoiled. He pulled his chair backward, putting tangible distance between himself and my mother. He gathered his belongings, avoiding her gaze entirely, and signaled his date to leave. The reaction cascaded through the room like a falling line of dominoes. The VIP attendees stood up en masse. They did not linger to offer condolences. They recognized that the aura surrounding Victoria and Serena was no longer just embarrassing. It was legally dangerous. The mention of bank fraud, identity theft, and a $20 million penalty transformed my family from social climbers into radioactive liabilities. No one wanted to be photographed standing near ground zero of a federal financial scandal. The journalists in the press pit wasted no time. They were already transmitting the audio recordings, the images of the forged contract, and the annulment details directly to their editorial desks. The digital execution was occurring in real time, broadcasting across the globe before the attendees even reached the valet stand. The master of ceremonies recognized the evening had reached its natural conclusion. He approached the secondary microphone near the edge of the stage and politely dismissed the crowd, thanking them for attending the annual summit. The string quartet did not resume playing. I remained positioned behind the clear acrylic podium, observing the exodus. I watched hundreds of tailored suits and designer gowns stream toward the exit doors. The ambient noise shifted from the sophisticated hum of networking to the urgent shuffling of a mass evacuation. Within 15 minutes, the cavernous grand ballroom was practically deserted. The catering staff vanished into the service corridors. The journalists packed their heavy camera equipment and departed. The vintage chandeliers above cast their golden glow over a sea of empty tables, abandoned champagne flutes, and discarded cloth napkins. Only 2 guests remained on the main floor. Serena and Victoria stood alone in the center of the vast, empty space. The visual contrast was stark. They were draped in rented silver and plum couture, surrounded by the opulent architecture of the Roosevelt, but they looked remarkably small. The invisible armor of their arrogance was stripped away, leaving behind 2 exposed, terrified individuals facing the catastrophic consequences of their own actions. They looked up at the elevated stage. I stepped away from the podium, moving toward the front edge of the platform. David stood a few paces behind my right shoulder, holding the leather-bound portfolio containing their legal death warrant. My mother and sister began to walk down the center aisle toward me. Their posture was entirely devoid of the haughty swagger they paraded into my corporate boardroom just days earlier. Serena stumbled slightly, her high heels catching on the carpet. Her breathing was audible, a ragged, rhythmic gasping that echoed in the quiet room. They reached the base of the stage, looking up at me. Victoria broke first. The woman who spent 2 decades cultivating a facade of unyielding aristocratic superiority crumbled. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor at the foot of the stage. The stiff fabric of her plum dress pooled around her in an untidy heap. She reached up with trembling hands and grasped the hem of my emerald silk gown. Tears streamed down her face, carving jagged tracks through her heavy makeup. These were not the calculated theatrical tears she deployed to manipulate country club acquaintances. This was raw, unfiltered terror. She looked up at me, her face contorted in agony. She begged, she pleaded for salvation. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words. She admitted the private wealth bank would contact federal authorities by morning. She confessed that securing a high-yield credit line using a stolen corporate identity constituted severe wire fraud. She sobbed, acknowledging that without the Meliora signing bonus, the bank would seize the Bel Air estate, repossess the vehicles, and initiate criminal proceedings. She cried out that she was too old to survive federal prison. She gripped the green silk tighter, begging her eldest daughter to clear the debt, to waive the $20 million institutional penalty, and to issue a public statement claiming the entire ordeal was a misunderstanding. She invoked the concept of family, pleading for mercy, based on the very biological tie she had spent my entire life minimizing. Beside her, Serena was actively hyperventilating. The younger sister, who carved my face onto her skull to steal my life, was struggling to draw oxygen into her lungs. She wrapped her arms around her own torso, swaying slightly. Serena looked up at me through bloodshot eyes. She offered a frantic, disjointed apology. She stated she was sorry for the wedding day. She apologized for forcing me into the oversized navy dress. She claimed she was sorry for banning me from the Vogue photographs and for treating me poorly. She repeated the word sorry over and over, a desperate mantra meant to unlock my checkbook. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the 2 weeping women. I analyzed their grief with the same clinical detachment I applied to market fluctuations. I listened to their apologies and identified the hollow core within their words. They were not mourning the destruction of our family. They were not weeping because they recognized the profound cruelty of their actions. They felt no remorse for the years of psychological manipulation, the forced isolation, or the deliberate attempts to erase my self-worth. They were mourning the loss of the money. They were weeping for the vaporized social clout, the revoked credit lines, and the impending annulment. Their apologies were transactional. They viewed me exactly as they always had. I was merely a resource to be harvested. They previously used my shadow to make themselves shine. Now they wanted to use my wealth to shield themselves from the judicial system. They believed their tears would trigger a dormant sense of familial obligation. They assumed the sheer spectacle of their suffering would force me to revert to the compliant, invisible girl they raised me to be. They expected me to reach down, wipe away their tears, and write the check that would save their lives. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman wearing the emerald dress. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I did not feel the urge to comfort them. The surgical removal of their synthetic reality was complete, and the resulting wound was entirely self-inflicted. I looked down at my mother's hands, gripping my gown, preparing to deliver the final boundary that would sever our connection forever. I looked down at the women weeping on the polished marble floor of the Roosevelt Hotel. The grand ballroom was empty, stripped of its glamour, leaving only the hollow acoustics of their desperation. Victoria continued to clutch the hem of my emerald silk gown, her knuckles white. Serena remained curled inward, gasping for air, her synthetic features contorted in panic. They were drowning in the consequences of a tidal wave they deliberately engineered. Growing up, Victoria taught me that vulnerability was a liability. She utilized my childhood insecurities as ammunition to reinforce her own superiority. She trained me to believe my existence was a burden and my appearance was an embarrassment. Now the architect of my isolation was on her knees begging for salvation from the very daughter she tried to erase. I did not reach down to comfort her. I did not offer the reassuring platitudes she desperately sought. I stepped backward. The movement was slow, deliberate, and absolute. The heavy silk slipped through Victoria's trembling fingers. She reached out again, grasping at the empty air, attempting to reclaim the connection I just severed. She let out a sharp, pathetic sob. "You banished me from a public photograph to protect your lies," I stated. My voice was eerily calm, possessing the sharp, pristine clarity of winter ice. It did not echo with anger. It resonated with finality. "You claimed my authentic face would ruin your manufactured aesthetic." I paused, letting the silence stretch across the cavernous room. I wanted the words to sink deep into the bedrock of their consciousness. "Now," I continued, maintaining direct eye contact with my mother, "your manufactured reality has ruined your lives." Victoria shook her head frantically, denying the undeniable truth. She stammered, attempting to string together a coherent defense. She blamed the pressure of Los Angeles society. She blamed the predatory interest rates of her credit cards. She even attempted to blame Serena, citing her daughter's relentless ambition. She was doing what she had done for 28 years. She was desperately searching for a scapegoat to carry the weight of her own failures. I did not entertain her delusions. I raised my hand, silencing her mid-sentence. "There is no negotiation," I informed her. "There is no hidden reserve of familial duty you can draw from. You spent decades treating me as a disposable resource. You assumed I would always absorb your cruelty because I was too weak to walk away." I turned my attention to Serena. The younger sister, who spent her entire life basking in the spotlight, was currently staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. The surgical scars tucked behind her ears were clearly visible under the harsh security lighting of the emptying ballroom. "You wanted to be me so badly, you paid a surgeon to carve my face onto your skull," I told Serena. The words hung in the air, a brutal acknowledgement of her profound insecurity. "Then you attempted to steal my intellect, my company, and my future to fund your counterfeit existence. You traded your integrity for a temporary illusion." Serena squeezed her eyes shut. She did not attempt to argue. The audio recording of her illicit proposition at the Obsidian Club had stripped away her ability to manipulate. She was exposed. I signaled David, who stood a few paces behind me. He stepped forward, his expression a mask of pristine corporate detachment. He held 2 thick manila envelopes. He dropped them onto the marble floor. The heavy thud of the paper striking the stone echoed like a final verdict. "Those envelopes contain the official legal filings from my corporate litigation team," I stated, gesturing toward the documents. "The first is a civil lawsuit pursuing $20 million in institutional damages resulting from your violation of the morality clause. The second is a permanent, comprehensive cease and desist order." Victoria stared at the envelopes as if they were venomous serpents. She understood the implications. These were not idle threats. These were the structural mechanisms of her absolute ruin. "You will not call my office," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave. "You will not attempt to bypass my security team. You will not approach my residence or communicate with my legal proxy. If you violate this injunction, I will instruct my attorneys to pursue maximum punitive damages, and I will personally forward all evidence of your wire fraud directly to the federal authorities." The message was unequivocal. I was not merely cutting them out of my life. I was establishing a militarized border around my existence. "Calista," Victoria whispered, her voice cracking, "we are your family." It was the final, desperate deployment of the ultimate manipulative weapon. She was attempting to use biology as a hostage negotiator. I looked at her. I analyzed the woman who gave birth to me and found nothing but a hollow vessel of vanity and debt. "You are strangers who happen to share my DNA," I stated firmly. "We are permanently done." I did not wait for a response. I did not linger to watch them open the envelopes or process the full magnitude of their destruction. I turned my back. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my posture rigid, my pace steady. The rhythmic clicking of my minimalist gold heels against the polished marble floor echoed through the quiet space. It sounded like the ticking of a clock marking the end of an era. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not offer them a final glance of pity or triumph. I left them kneeling in the ruins of their own hubris. David matched my stride, falling into step slightly behind me. We exited the grand ballroom, passing through the heavy velvet curtains and moving into the deserted service corridors of the Roosevelt Hotel. The ambient noise of the Los Angeles night filtered through the exit doors, replacing the stifling silence of the gala. We reached the subterranean loading dock, where a discreet black sedan waited. The engine hummed quietly. David opened the rear door. He paused for a fraction of a second, offering a rare, genuine smile. It was the silent acknowledgement of a flawless tactical victory. He closed the door behind me and climbed into the front passenger seat. The vehicle pulled away from the hotel, navigating the dark, winding streets of the Hollywood Hills. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows. I leaned back against the leather upholstery, closing my eyes. The physical exhaustion of the evening began to settle into my muscles, but my mind remained incredibly sharp. The operation was a complete success. The fraudulent contract was terminated. The identity theft was publicly exposed. The Vanguard family was extricated from the parasitic entanglement. The threat to my corporate empire was neutralized. Yet the most significant victory was not financial or professional. It was profoundly personal. For my entire life, Victoria and Serena operated under the assumption that they held the power. They believed they could dictate my worth, define my boundaries, and utilize my silence as a weapon against me. Tonight, I did not just expose their lies, I obliterated the power dynamic. I demonstrated that the quiet, unassuming girl they exiled to the shadows possessed the architectural knowledge to dismantle their entire world. The tension that defined my existence, the constant, vigilant defense against their emotional extortion, evaporated. The air in the sedan felt lighter, cleaner. I enforced the ultimate boundary. I deployed absolute, freezing indifference. As the car crested the canyon road, the expansive view of the Pacific Ocean opened up before me. The dark water stretched toward the horizon, a massive, untamed expanse of possibility. The conflict with my family was officially over. The war was won. The tactical camouflage was discarded. Calista Meliora, the architect of the invisible empire, was finally free to operate in the light. The only remaining task was to build a future that reflected the authenticity I demanded from the world. 5 years have passed since the velvet curtains parted at the Roosevelt Hotel. I sit on the expansive limestone balcony of my Malibu estate, watching the morning fog burn off the surface of the Pacific Ocean. The saltwater breeze carries a crisp, energizing chill. I hold a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, observing a pod of dolphins break the dark water near the horizon. There is no lingering anxiety resting in my chest. I do not dodge frantic phone calls or manage the explosive fallout of synthetic performances. The silence surrounding me is expensive earned and pristine. Meliora Public Relations did not merely survive the scandal of that night. The firm absorbed the kinetic energy of the revelation and expanded into a global titan. The industry watched how I handled a multi-million-dollar fraud attempt originating from my own bloodline. They witnessed the clinical precision of the surgical excision. Consequently, the demand for our specialized services quadrupled overnight. We no longer restrict our operations to crisis control for the Hollywood elite. We dictate high-level corporate strategy for international technology conglomerates. We orchestrate geopolitical image campaigns for emerging nations. My transition from the anonymous ghost in the machine to the highly visible chief executive solidified our reputation as the most formidable agency in the Western Hemisphere. The strategic partnership with Thomas Vanguard flourished beyond our initial projections. He valued the unvarnished truth above all other commodities. We formalized a joint venture holding company last spring, merging his vast logistical infrastructure with my behavioral analytics. We conduct our quarterly strategy sessions not in sterile boardrooms, but on the teak deck of his private yacht, charting navigational courses for new global markets. His son Harrison secured an expedited annulment within 30 days of the gala. The young heir recently married a grounded, brilliant environmental attorney who has never utilized a digital filter or a ring light in her life. The Vanguard legacy remains untarnished, fortified by the very ordeal meant to drain it. Wealth accumulation for the mere sake of hoarding capital is a hollow, unfulfilling pursuit. The true utility of power lies in systemic, structural intervention. I established the Meliora Foundation during the third year of our international expansion. We bypass the archaic traditional charitable models that offer temporary relief. Instead, we deploy targeted financial strikes to protect young women trapped in toxic familial environments. We fund dedicated legal trusts for minors seeking emancipation from manipulative guardians. We provide comprehensive mental health resources and underwrite full academic scholarships for individuals striving to build a life independent of their biological anchors. I review the priority grant applications personally. Whenever I read a digital file detailing a mother who weaponizes deep-seated insecurities or a sibling who demands submission, I recognize the emotional terrain. Just last month, we extracted a brilliant young graphic designer from a household where her parents routinely sabotaged her freelance contracts to force her into a subservient domestic role. We provided her with elite legal representation, a secure residential lease, and the seed capital to launch her own independent studio. I ensure those applicants receive the exact tactical support I lacked during my own prolonged isolation. We do not just hand them charitable donations. We provide the architectural blueprints for their permanent autonomy. As for the architects of my former isolation, their current reality reflects the inescapable geometry of their choices. I do not maintain contact, but my corporate security team provides brief annual audits to ensure the permanent legal injunctions remain unviolated. Victoria and Serena currently reside in a cramped two-bedroom apartment situated behind a fading strip mall in the sweltering suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. The civil litigation and the subsequent federal bank fraud inquiries atomized their California illusions. The Bel Air estate was foreclosed upon and sold at a rapid public auction. The luxury vehicles were repossessed by the original leasing agencies. Their credit profiles were annihilated, rendering them incapable of securing even a basic cellular phone contract without a substantial cash deposit. To satisfy the remaining court-ordered restitution payments, they were forced into the only sector willing to hire them without rigorous background checks. They work grueling hourly shifts at a discount retail cosmetics chain. The poetic justice is sharp enough to draw blood. Serena, the woman who paid a discreet surgeon to carve my facial architecture onto her skull to secure an aristocratic dynasty, now stands behind a fluorescent-lit counter pushing trial-size anti-aging serums to tourists. Without access to elite dermatologists and expensive maintenance procedures, the surgical alterations she purchased have aged terribly. Her artificial beauty is failing her, and she lacks the liquid capital to repair the sagging foundation. Victoria spends her mandatory break periods scrolling through social media platforms she can no longer participate in, watching the world move forward without her. They live in a prison constructed entirely of their own hubris. I set my ceramic mug down on the patio table. The California sun is fully risen, illuminating the jagged coastline. Los Angeles glitters in the distance, a sprawling metropolis built on the fragile currency of perception. It is a society obsessed with the perfect angle, the curated post, and the relentless pursuit of unearned status. People exhaust their spirits and their bank accounts, attempting to construct a flawless, impenetrable facade. They fear the raw, unedited truth because they believe the truth is rarely profitable. Yet the most devastating tactical maneuver a person can execute in a world of pervasive illusions is to simply exist genuinely. Victoria and Serena tried to bury me beneath drab clothing and heavy tortoiseshell glasses because they recognized the inherent danger of my authenticity. They understood that my natural light would eventually expose their artificial shadows. They intended the prolonged isolation to break my spirit. Instead, the darkness provided the exact environmental conditions required for a root system to grow deep and unbreakable. They taught me how to navigate the void. They forged the resilience that built my empire. I turned my attention away from the crashing waves. I speak directly to anyone listening who understands the specific gravity of being the designated family scapegoat. I know the unique, agonizing pain of sitting outside the iron gates while the people who should protect you prioritize a superficial photograph over your presence. I know how it feels to be handed a bribe to disappear. Your worth is not determined by the individuals who try to keep you hidden in the background. The flaws they project onto you are merely terrified reflections of their own profound inadequacies. Do not shrink to make them comfortable in their deception. Do not accept the drab garments they demand you wear. Stand up, shed the heavy disguise, and step into the glaring light. True beauty is an undeniable force of nature, and the best revenge you can ever achieve is a life beautifully, authentically lived.
We often gaze at the glittering facades of modern American life, the sprawling, manicured estates, the perfectly curated social media feeds, the endless pursuit of the California dream, and mistake the gleaming surface for reality. But what happens when the cameras stop flashing and the heavy velvet curtains fall shut? The story of Calista Meliora is more than just a dramatic tale of corporate espionage and familial betrayal. It serves as a profound cautionary tale, holding an uncompromising mirror up to our most deeply ingrained parenting values, family responsibilities, and the long-term guidance we offer our children. From the perspective of a spiritual practitioner observing the intricate web of modern social dynamics, this narrative provides a roadmap for personal transformation and a stark warning about the hollow nature of performative love. In a culture that frequently treats image as absolute currency, it is dangerously easy for well-meaning parents to lose their way. We see families fall into the seductive trap of prioritizing a manufactured Instagram grid over the flesh and blood child standing right in front of them. The heart-wrenching dynamic between Calista and her sister Serena perfectly illustrates the devastating generational toll of the golden child syndrome. Serena was meticulously groomed to be the spotlight stealer, the chosen vessel for her family's social ambitions. Calista, conversely, was relegated to the painful role of the drab scapegoat. She was intentionally hidden away, her brilliance dimmed so that her sister's artificial light could appear brighter. This type of toxic comparison does not merely breed sibling rivalry, it fundamentally destroys the sacred fabric of the family unit. As parents navigating a superficial world, it is our highest duty to recognize that every child possesses a unique, natural bone structure, both in their physical presence and their spiritual essence. When we force a child to suppress their authentic self to fit a specific aesthetic or societal expectation, we actively fracture their soul. We must teach our children that true worth, real power, and lasting respect come from competence, character, and unwavering honesty, not from synthetic beauty or rented luxury. Victoria and Serena tragically believed that being not camera-ready was a social death sentence. Yet, as the story reveals, the most successful, powerful person in the room, the billionaire kingmaker, was the very daughter they tried so desperately to hide. From a deeper, spiritual perspective, the society depicted in this narrative is suffering from a severe case of vul-min, or profound ignorance. It is a state of being where individuals tragically mistake the mask for the soul. Serena spent a staggering $100,000 on surgeries to mimic a natural beauty she did not possess. Yet it only took a single unfiltered photo to expose the surgical scars and the heavy editing behind her manufactured life. This reflects a social reality that is both financially and morally bankrupt. It is a world where individuals cling desperately to social clout while facing literal and spiritual foreclosure. Furthermore, the family's frantic desperation for Serena to marry into old money just to save them from ruin highlights the ultimate failure of parenting, using a child as a financial escape hatch. This complete lack of emotional awareness turns the traditional family structure, which should be a sanctuary of fairness and unconditional support, into a cold, transactional nightmare. However, the universe operates on the unshakable law of cause and effect, or karma. The story illustrates that lies inevitably become a suffocating noose. Serena's hubris and her brazen identity theft led to a public dismantling that was surgical, factual, and completely devoid of pity. For those observing from a place of spiritual mindfulness, this climax is not a tale of petty, vindictive revenge. Rather, it is the inevitable, cold weight of a shattered power dynamic that occurs when absolute truth collides with absolute falsehood. How, then, do we guide our children toward a better life? How do we cultivate our own inner selves to avoid this tragic trajectory? The path forward, beautifully demonstrated by the architect in the shadows, is built upon three unshakable pillars of character: wisdom, morality, and fortitude. First is wisdom, tri tue, the profound power of discernment. When Calista was cruelly banished from her sister's wedding, she did not scream, throw a tantrum, or beg for the scraps of her mother's affection. She absorbed the situation and analyzed it with pristine clarity. Wisdom is the ability to be a silent kingmaker, patiently building an empire in the shadows, while others waste their precious energy on fleeting vanity. It is the quiet knowing that true beauty is undeniable, and it does not require a digital filter to be seen and respected by those who truly matter. Second is morality, Dao Duk, the establishment of the ironclad clause. Calista's entire multi-million-dollar business was built upon an uncompromising authenticity and morality clause. Even when her family stooped to the darkest depths of extortion, threatening to forcibly institutionalize her to protect their lies, she maintained a stoic, analytical tone. She refused to descend to their level of malice. True morality in parenting and in life is learning how to set absolute, freezing indifference as an impenetrable boundary against toxicity. It is choosing fairness and integrity over emotional chaos. Third is fortitude and willpower, the remarkable strength of playing the long game. Calista endured decades of being mocked, belittled, and hidden away, yet she used that very darkness to learn how to shine brighter. Her fortitude was forged in the fires of reinvention, allowing her to eventually shed the drab, oversized clothes and step into her true, radiant identity at the exact right moment. Ultimately, she transformed her profound pain into a higher purpose, utilizing her vast resources to mentor other women recovering from the deep wounds of toxic family environments. As we navigate the complex, often treacherous waters of raising the next generation, we must continuously ask ourselves what kind of legacy we are truly leaving behind. Are we building homes rooted in honesty and emotional awareness? Or are we constructing fragile movie sets? If you find yourself reflecting deeply on these invisible family dynamics, and if this journey of healing and resilience resonates with the silent battles you fought in your own life, please follow our channel, Sophia Told Stories, where we continue to explore the hidden truths of family, survival, and the indomitable human spirit. The ultimate lesson: the best way to cultivate oneself is to realize that your worth is never and will never be defined by those who try to keep you hidden in the shadows. The best revenge is a life beautifully, authentically lived. But as you close this chapter and the screen fades to black, take a moment to look at the quiet, unlit spaces in your own home. When the borrowed dresses are returned, the luxury cars are repossessed, and the cameras finally stop recording, what truly remains? Are the relationships you've built with your children rooted in the unshakable bedrock of truth and unconditional love? Or are they made of fragile glass, waiting to shatter under the weight of a single, unfiltered light? The answer, lingering quietly in the silent shadows of your own life, is yours alone to discover.